final speaker for this stream today. We have a luxury to have again someone who I know is very enthusiastic about product development as a whole and looking it from many different angles. So without kind of a further ado right now, let me introduce Tommi Raivisto from KONE.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone here and online. I do realize that I stand. It's been a long day, and I stand between you and the bar. So I try to make this as pleasant as possible and kind of fast-paced. A little bit about my background. So I've been 15 years doing professionally software-related products in a couple of different industries and in a couple of different countries. In a quite different type of roles. So that's kind of where I come from. Last 5 years I've been working in a smart building and city environment. Now for the last year and a half with KONE as the Chief Technology Architect. What I will talk about is a few words about architecture in general, some thoughts, experiences about the meaning and role of architecture in product business, and then a few words about architecture and KONE as well at the end. So when we think about architecture, quite common definition is that it's the structure of a system, organization, and the relations between components, and or it could be that it's the principles that are shared, technical principles that are shared by different implementing parties, and that's correct. So technically that is, but I more like to think about it from the perspective of the purpose of why architecture and what we want to achieve with it. So that's why I like this one definition, which is saying that architecture is about the stuff that's hard to change later. And the reason why I like about it is that it kind of indicates that, okay, if something is hard to change later, maybe I'll have to be a bit careful, be smart about those kind of decisions. So that's nice. And then as the fourth point, architecture sometimes is seen as something kind of that you define and then you implement it and then it's kind of, that's it. But that's not the case. So you never have the final architecture and you never completely implement it. It's a living thing. And why is that? It's because this is maybe my favorite definition. I like to say that architecture is connecting code and strategy. And the thing there is that strategy, it's always, everybody has their own. Every organization, regardless of what the state they are in, they have some. And it kind of, the strategy is ought to reflect their current status and where they want to go, the vision. So essentially what I'm saying is that no architecture, at least in any meaningful level, is common to two different organizations. So just as an example here, so if we think about a startup, there it's really about how to find in a fast and cost-efficient way the product market fit. And that's kind of, I've been working with several startups, and before they make it, if they make it to the scale-up phase, they may have rewritten their stuff like 4 times or 5 times. I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions, but it kind of makes sense because you're looking for a business model that works, and you don't want to build things too much for the future. That would be just waste of effort. Then when you find the product market fit, then it becomes a little bit different type of game. So then it's about the scale. Suddenly we're hiring a lot of people and we are getting a lot of customers. And actually now we start to think from the architecture perspective that how do we support that growth? And how do we support that scale? And we need to think about things like resilience, because for a startup, it might be okay that some things, maybe not in a life science area, but in many areas it might be okay that a startup, they may have some hiccups. There's some sort of early adopters as customers, but then when we start to scale, what is expected is resiliency. And also at the scale-up phase, this company, they still want to move fast. So that is, of course, still and it's becoming a bit of a challenge. I mean, on this side, with this kind of architecture, with this kind of operational mode, by definition, you're fast. And here, you start to have some inertia. And then, when we think about like a larger organization, it kind of becomes a very different ball game, because there we have a lot of stuff. I mean, if you noticed, I had some years when on my intro slide, if I just quickly move there for a while, these are not when I worked for these companies. I may look like it, but that's not the case. These are when these companies were founded. And actually, I realized when I was updating the slide that most of these companies I've been working for are over 100 years old. But during these 100 years, they have, of course, accumulated not software all the time, but you can imagine that they have a lot of stuff, and that's what these kind of grown-ups need to worry about. So how to still kind of maintain velocity in this sort of complex environment. Maintenance cost, I'll say a few words about that soon. And then the customer user experience. We have these different systems implemented. Each of them gives a little bit different type of data. You may need, as a user, you may need different credentials to sign to this system, and my profile is different here, and all this type of challenge. And here it's about the options, because, and I'll talk about that as well. I mean, strategic options for future. So the rest of the time, I'm more going to talk about the right-hand side. Quickly about the role of architects. I think this is really fluid in my experience, and I like to think about it in a way that architects, they kind of reflect a state of where the organization is. So there's kind of a little bit of maybe playful. I like to say that the number of architects in an organization negatively correlates with its architectural cohesion or maturity. And I don't mean by that architects create chaos. Architects create chaos. I mean, maybe there are some that do. I mean, I can't talk on behalf of every one of them. But the point is that if you think about it, the number of architects or architecture resources, it should kind of reflect that how the organization sees the need for growing architectural capability, and how the organization, maybe how kind of capable are the other functions to do these architectural decisions. And in fact, if we think about some large technology companies, for example, that are pretty advanced, they may not have any architects, because it's the engineering, the product management, it's others who are like taking care of that. So there's this one way to think about it is that architecture is so important that you should not leave it for architects to take care of. But having architects is not bad. I mean, that's not. I'm saying the opposite. I think it's an investment in creating this architectural capability. And then I've seen it several times that those architects become maybe they take some different roles as the organization grows and the maturity. Maybe they become the head of product management or engineering or something like that. But I think the key thing is that the architects don't just define architectures, they actually need to build architecture capability. And when the organization is mature, these are such essential decisions and things for the organization that it's kind of built into how it operates. Velocity, I mean, this is something that everybody wants. So it's complicated. We have a lot of vertical things. And things are dependent on each other. And where we would like to get into is that there's kind of clear, meaningful structure, and maybe like 80% of customer relevant features can be implemented without like heavy cross coordination between huge number of teams, which is kind of really tiring. I mean, some of you for sure know what I'm talking about. So how to get from this type of ball of mud into something like this? Obviously, in this side, you still have the challenge that, what if the thing that I want to do for customer impacts these things here? You can't completely prevent that. Then you have to coordinate and plan to synchronize, and that can be very painful. But at least majority of the things can be done easily and with high velocity. And these different pieces can move in their clock frequency. So I think from the architecture perspective, this is one of the in kind of this large organization, this is one of the key targets. The second thing is complexity. So in most industries, the amount of complexity is just exploding. This is about the car industry, and the productivity is increasing as well, but the bad news is that it's much slower than the complexity. And what do you think that means? If you have an organization with a certain amount of resources and the complexity goes like this and your productivity goes a little bit up, that's going to make it quite difficult to actually invest in value-adding work at some point. So fighting this complexity is, and how do you do that? I mean, architecturally there's many ways, but of course one thing is to just unnecessary configurations, software versions, minimize this sort of undesired functionality by centralizing, having common implementations, and then obviously choice of technology is what do we build, what do we buy, and so on. And then final kind of point is this sort of composability. So it is increasingly difficult to predict and plan for the future. And there is actually mathematics on these topics that can be found here. But it's like if you think you know exactly what you will need, modularity is like a poor way of doing it. There will be just overhead. But if you are not 100% sure, and I mean, if you are smart, you are not 100% sure what is going to be needed in a couple of years, then modularity makes a lot of sense. And this sort of integration complexity that results from modularity is easier, and again, there's mathematics on this, so don't have to trust just me. It's easier to handle than this complexity inside the implementation. Obviously, this modularity is also, there's a lot of bad examples. So there's companies who maybe move into something like this too fast. For example, you have some sort of a microservice architecture with tens or even hundreds different elements, and that's like it takes quite a lot of discipline and practice how to manage that kind of set of things. With these architectural things, the challenge that I see very often is exactly this, that things will actually get worse before they get better. So if you think about, in principle, you are ought to do in your business like two types of things. So things that create value for customers, and then things that help you to create value faster. But in many organizations, it is not easy to get priority, because these are not always easy to quantify. I mean, sometimes they can be, but sometimes often. So I think it takes certain maturity and certain good judgment and vision to actually make sure that this thing gets enough, these architectural improvements get bandwidth. They don't usually create direct customer value. And then one challenge there is that I think everybody knows this sort of big transformation projects that, you have the product platform needs to be renewed. It's 20 years old and it's a spaghetti and doesn't scale and this and that. Or on IT domain you have the old SAP that is kind of not supported anymore, and then you need to, and then the question is really that how to kind of move away from this sort of this big bang things where everything has to change at once. I mean, those are always trouble. So I think some sort of a transition architecture where it's possible to move into this new model in smaller steps. I think that is something that is like really, really important in this. But nevertheless, I think this takes certain maturity, and in a very traditional sense, where sometimes there is this sort of business defines what technology does, I think this can be a really challenge. So I think there has to be like mutual understanding that these are sometimes even more important things, because it can, and it should be continuous. So when you think about your kind of portfolio of investments, certain amount of them should always go to architectural improvements to prevent being in this big bang situation when you have somehow back against the wall and you must, the whole thing has to change. And those are the kind of things that lead into deep trouble often. So quickly about KONE then a little bit. So I suppose most of you know that. I think the key takeaway from this slide is that KONE has significant operations. So unlike some purely digital companies, so there are tens of thousands of people who are selling, installing, maintaining, fixing, upgrading, modernizing this KONE equipment. There is elevators, there's escalators, there's doors and gates and so on. So that's one side. KONE has significant global operations, and there's a lot of iron, a lot of hardware that has to be moved and manufactured and installed. Then the other side, of course, is that KONE also has quite high digital ambitions, at least compared to competition. So it is about both digital and physical. It's about how can we make that those physical operations as smooth as possible. How can we use machine learning to kind of predict the maintenance need, and maybe go and optimize how our technicians on the field, for example, perform certain operations and so on. So that alone, of course, is a huge topic. But then it's also that, okay, what else can we do in the smart building? How do we get out of the elevator shaft, and what are the kind of opportunities there? And KONE is also active with the digital products. One key thing there is, of course, that related to previous presentations as well, how do we open this thing up for different type of use cases that we can think of? For example, in Asia, in China, these service robots that move in the building are increasingly important. So via APIs, we make it possible for them to, the doors have to be kept open a little bit longer, for example, and so on. So that is where we have the dev.kone.com, where we kind of develop those APIs for our partner ecosystem. About KONE, so there's kind of three main domains when I look into our architecture. We have the equipment with the embedded software and hardware and so on. Then we have the digital services with the data analytics and so on, and then we have the IT system, the different type of tools that are used for running the business. And I think what's happening is that they used to be maybe more separate in the past, but I think this is probably common to any company in a similar type of business, that they're kind of merging, so they're becoming increasingly overlapping. That what used to be like a digital solution here, it's actually kind of increasingly linked into what kind of software update and configuration capabilities we have in the equipment. And by the way, the maintenance tools here that are being used need to support it as well. So this is a little bit of challenge. And then we're kind of going for this sort of a bounded model, in a sense that we understand that each of these domains, they have a little bit their own language, own clock frequency. And then kind of my focus is on these intersections between them. So I can't go and tell some of the guys in Hyvinkää, China, how to design elevators, but I think we have to clarify the interfaces just to make it possible for these different parts of the system operate together effectively. And last, if I look into kind of what kind of topics we are at the moment, what I have on my table at the moment. So here's a couple of examples. It's not the full list, but like I said, there are a lot of different components with very different clock frequencies. So for example, when we talk about manufacturing, there's kind of pretty long lead times. All the kind of all the plastics, all the different components, all these things have to be, there's also standards that have to be tested and kind of conformed to. So there's a certain clock frequency there. Then on the other hand, we have obviously our IT things like SAPs and others, they are not kind of famous for being super agile and kind of speedy either. But then we would like to do things very fast when it comes to customer experience, when it comes to our digital solutions. And kind of decoupling those things from each other is something that, how can we release like constantly? We probably don't want to go and update the firmware of some safety critical components like on daily basis that may not even be allowed by laws and standards. But when it comes to the pieces that the end users, for example, see, that is what we do. Then again, I already mentioned this split between kind of IT systems and R&D kind of products that used to be maybe a little bit more clear, but now it's very difficult to draw the line anymore. So I think we are kind of like, and if we don't kind of think about them together, it'll look fragmented and inconsistent for customers and users. So that is something that I think if there's companies who don't have a large R&D operation, then I think the IT piece is slightly different. But there's, in KONE's case, there's large R&D, and then there is this significant IT supporting the global operations, and then kind of like managing them together is important. Openness for customization and ecosystem partners. So this is something that there's a lot of different type of opportunities on that area that we can't even imagine ourselves. So that we're quite actively like looking for opportunities to open more of how our system operates in a meaningful way to our partners and customers. And also the current implementations have been created over previous years. So architecturally we are moving more into this sort of an API first microservices event driven type of design, kind of step by step. So that is clearly the kind of direction that works in our premise. But this is something that when we think about the existing stuff, it'll take a while before everything kind of works that way. But the new things being built, I think it's increasingly thought this way. And the final point here is data. Obviously, that's something that's kind of in the center of everything. So there's a lot of data, the IoT data from the systems that are connected to the cloud, kind of real-time information. Then we have the information about the customers, about their agreements, about the operations on the field, and of course all that. Then we need to be able to kind of crunch that and analyze that, and that leads into insights and actions sometimes. So I think how to make that like as easy and smooth as possible for whatever applications. Process automation, machine learning you can think of. I think that's really a big topic for us. So I promised I'd keep this fast-paced. I think I hopefully managed that. So thanks a lot for your interest. If you have time for some questions.
Thanks a lot, Tommi. And I think overall the kind of software industry or companies in doing software are more and more getting to this grown-up phase. So they will face these things what you just mentioned like all the time. So
True.
So I think that's a very, very important topic. Okay, do we have questions from the audience to Tommi? Yes, there was at least.
Yes, my question is about how you are able to integrate the equipment part on this software side and architecture, how this alignment happens in your case, from the architecture point of view.
Well, that's actually a really good question, and maybe I'll have to open up a little bit more KONE business to answer that. So KONE kind of serves two markets. So there is the new equipment, where the paying customer is the builder, who kind of puts the buildings together. And then there is the services market, where the paying customer is whoever owns the building or operates it. And what this means in practice, they are, by the way, about equal size at KONE, which is one thing that I'm excited about still about KONE, that the service business is almost similar size of the new equipment business. But the service business there's no way of knowing what kind of equipment is out there. It might be competitor equipment, it could be from KONE, but 20 years ago, these systems have a quite long life cycle, so there could be like 30, 40-year-old gear easily there. So from the service business perspective, we need to look into ways to support kind of retrofit, for example, connectivity and some sensors, so that we can kind of do similar type of improvements to our maintenance processes. But there we have solutions that can be retrofitted into existing system. And then, of course, when it comes to new equipment, we try to make sure that they have like as capable like APIs and interfaces that we can use and decouple via those.
Okay. Thank you. Is there an online question? Or?
Online question, but I have a question.
Okay, maybe we'll give Lapa one, right?
Unless we have somebody from the audience.
No, go ahead.
So I think some companies who do similar business and what KONE does take hardware and turn it into software enhanced service. One example was from Philips, who provided light as a service in Schiphol Airport. And that basically the argument goes that when anything you provide as a service, the problem of a customer becomes a problem of a service provider, and the customer just enjoys the benefits. Yeah. How do you see this in this kind of embedded service business where you're at?
I think there are some developments like that. It's construction industry which is not which is quite conservative, first of all. So I think that has to be taken into account. But there is some developments going to that direction. Of course, one practical challenge with this approach is that if I, as a customer, if I would buy this as a service for, I don't know, 20 years or 10 years, then something like an elevator or escalator, they're actually not easy to replace. So I would probably, as a customer, get kind of locked into that for some time, because these are not, you can't easily change from one elevator manufacturer to another. These are kind of significant projects. But I think that kind of models, and whether it's more like condition or performance-based contracts, I think these are, the industry is actively looking, and KONE is also looking at those.
Okay, any more questions? Because I still have one, which I would like to ask, and I'm happy you didn't have any questions. So kind of you had this very nice slide of that these are secondary things in a way, always in a priority, or could be seen as a secondary priorities, because those are like not providing like immediate value, but the value comes later. So my question is that what would be your guidance or tips and tricks that how to actually get still those prioritized?
Yeah, I think I could. Question. I mean, I could use some tips and advice how to do that. I think that's not straightforward, but I think it goes back into making sure that the stakeholders, kind of the business and the technology side, can talk the same language, and kind of try to explain the benefits, and make sure that this kind of engineering team has certain capacity available. So either it has to be explained so that the kind of like the business side understands the importance, or then the engineering unit needs to have some capacity that they can allocate for this type of things autonomously. And I don't know what is kind of like the best. I think it really depends on where the organization is in terms of maturity and how everything works at the moment.
Okay, thanks a lot. Let's give an applause to Tom.
Thank you.